right now, right here, right now.
What should counterparties be doing now to prepare for the Phase 4 and Phase 5 initial margin deadlines?
It's a very timely question, Eugene. ISDA just came out with a case study where they specifically were focused, and the audience being Phase 4 and Phase 5 initial margin, with 8 steps of what these institutions and entities should be thinking about. And I'm not going to go through all 8, but it's encompassing front office, documentation, technology, operational process, your custodian. It's a myriad of disciplines that need to be involved early on when you look ahead at what the initial margin segregation is going to mean for the next, for the Phase 4 and Phase 5 participants.
What are likely to be some of the impacts upon counterparties of the initial margin deadlines for next year and then 2020?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting, and just the sheer size of the participants that are going to be caught up in Phase 4 and Phase 5. So right now there's about $100 billion in collateral that's being segregated with the first 2, and you can say another small amount on top of that in the third phase. It's less than 50 entities that are impacted by the first 3 phases, but the estimates go from 500 to almost 3,000 entities impacted by the end of 2020. So the reason why I bring that up is that that's an awful lot of documentation that needs to be put in place. That's an awful lot of conversations with custodians to establish your custodial relationship for the initial margin. There's impacts on your technology. The front office, as far as for trading, as I said earlier, is impacted. But there are just so many institutions, entities that are impacted by these later phases. And the estimates, as I indicated, are 500 to almost 3,000. That's a big difference. So it really is something where I think the industry is doing a good job getting out as much as they can in front of this. It's over 2 years away, right? So the third wave is not hitting until September. We're already talking about 4th and 5th wave, which is next September and then September 2020. So I think the lessons learned in the first couple of phases have helped the trade association like ISDA and others that are also doing some work in this space, to get the word out and really run working groups. Acadiasoft does a lot of that. They do, and they're getting people involved slowly.
And from your experience, what do you think was the most important lesson learned that will help for the later phases?
I think the one that might be most relevant is the amount of time that it takes for documentation to be put in place. Simply because there's just so many participants, and every one of those entities needs to have that document in place. So there was a rush to get the first wave, like the market wasn't ready for it, and it was a fraction of, we're talking like 25 entities in that first wave. So when you think about that, how small in number that was in the first couple of phases, yet still the industry had difficulties, had challenges getting documentation in place, and then you start to think about the immense size of the 4 and 5 phases. I think that's got to be the biggest one, the documentation lift.
How will firms cope when they have to process at the same time variation margining and margin calls related to the IM mandates?
People aren't really talking too much about that right now. I think the biggest concern is, how do I get set up, right? How do I get a documentation? How do I get a custodial relationship? How do I even determine if the rules, I am eligible under the rules to actually post and receive initial margin? So there's I think that's where the energy is. I don't think there's that much energy right now, and I think that it will be a challenge for some of the smaller players that are getting caught in phase 4 and phase 5, especially phase 5. A lot of them don't have systems, right? They don't have collateral systems. They have a trading system. They can determine what the notional derivatives is going to be and whether they get caught up, but they don't have the day-to-day process in a very automated fashion. So I think that is an area that probably will be underserved and overlooked a little bit, until it gets either closer and maybe the wave 4 participants struggle with that, or it's an after effect of phase 5.
What margining and related conditions would cause a buy-side firm's operations to seriously consider outsourcing to a custodian?
Well, the part of this initial margin segregation rules requires the use of a custodian. So, that's mandated. You can't house it with an affiliate, and that goes on a bilateral basis. So, the custodians are going to be in the middle of that from some perspective by virtue of holding the collateral, having either a tri-party model where they're allocating the collateral dynamically, or a third-party model where they're in an account control arrangement. So many of the custodians, maybe most of the large custodians, have outsourcing solutions. So I think that the sheer amount of activity that the custodians are going to have coming their way in the initial margin will probably open up some opportunities for them to talk to existing clients, like, hey, you know what, you have the initial margin with us. Why don't we think about your variation margin process? You can save some costs by moving to us, perhaps, or be more efficient. There's a lot of reasons why outsourcing makes sense in that scenario.
And then these clients could also leverage their positions with the custodians too.
Absolutely, yeah. One could be one pool of collateral, and if it's the tri-party model, dynamically allocated to satisfy the initial margin, and that excess that's not allocated can be utilized to satisfy variation margin or other funding.